Two divers entered the bell for what was supposed to be a routine descent. Seconds later, every support line was sliced clean, and the bell plunged over 328 feet to the ocean floor. For the next 13 hours, no one knew if they were dead or still waiting to be saved. What went wrong in those terrifying moments? And why didn't rescue arrive in time? This is a story of the Star Canopus tragedy, a routine dive that turned deadly, leaving two divers trapped deep beneath the ocean surface. The North Sea, in the late autumn of 1978, was as unforgiving as ever. Its waters churned beneath a slate-gray sky, winds pushing waves like wandering giants across the oil fields that dotted the horizon. It was an era of rapid expansion and offshore drilling, and the ocean was not yet fully tamed. Rigs and platforms stood like skeletal titans against the stormy canvas of Scotland's eastern coast. Among them, the Barrow Alpha platform, situated more than 200 miles northeast of Aberdeen, carried out its daily operations, a floating island of metal and fire. Supporting it was a Star Canopus, a semi-submersible diving support vessel designed for operations below the ocean surface. Its function was both vital and dangerous, deploying commercial divers into the deep to maintain the infrastructure that made oil extraction possible. On board, routines had been honed to mechanical precision. The crew knew their roles, and the divers knew the risks. That November, two experienced divers, Lothar Ward, 28, and Gerard Jerry Prangley, 29, prepared for what was expected to be a standard excursion into the deep. The two men were colleagues and friends, veterans of the diving world. Ward, originally from South Africa, was meticulous and composed. Prangley, from the UK, was known for his steady nerves and professionalism. They had worked together before and were familiar with the cold pressure of the North Sea. The mission was simple: descend the diving bell to a designated depth near the seabed beside the Barrow Alpha. The bell was a compact metal chamber lowered by cables, providing life support through a thick umbilical that supplied heat, oxygen, and communication. It was one of the most advanced systems available at the time, but it also left no room for error. As Ward and Prangley climbed into the bell, the surface crew performed final checks. The sea was rough, but nothing out of the ordinary. Communication lines were clear. Equipment readings were nominal. Everything was ready. With a hydraulic groan, the diving bell was released into the choppy water, the cable unwinding as it began its slow, controlled descent into the cold blackness. No one aboard the Star Canopus could have imagined what would unfold in the next few minutes. A mechanical fault, a violent jolt, and then silence. This is a story of a routine dive that turned catastrophic. A story of severed lifelines, desperate rescue efforts, and two men lost not in the chaos of action, but in the quiet suffocation of isolation. This is a tragedy of the Star Canopus diving bell accident, one of the most haunting maritime incidents in the history of North Sea diving. The diving bell had just slipped beneath the surface, a silvery orb vanishing into the depths of the North Sea. Inside, Lothar Ward and Gerard Prangley sat in the cramped, pressure-proof chamber. The bell was designed to carry two divers safely to the seabed and back, with thick steel walls and tightly sealed ports. It was connected to the Star Canopus by several vital systems: the drop wire, which supported the bell's weight and controlled its vertical position; the umbilical, a thick cable that carried hot water, breathing gas, communications, and power; and the guide wires, which stabilized the bell as it descended in turbulent waters. From above, the surface crew monitored the descent, carefully adjusting winches and checking readouts. The depth gauge ticked steadily downward, 100 feet, 150, 200. There was no indication of trouble. The seas were moderate, the gear functioning. Ward and Prangley, sealed inside their steel cocoon, likely felt a familiar tug of pressure building against the walls. But then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. A loud crash reverberated across the deck of the Star Canopus. Crew members spun toward the source, a sudden, chaotic movement near the ship's side. The anchor chain, a heavy length of steel normally used to secure positioning, had broken loose. Whether it was due to tension, improper securing, or corrosion would only be known later. What was clear was that the massive chain had dropped unexpectedly and violently. In its freefall, the chain struck the critical systems attached to the diving bell. It didn't just graze the lines, it severed them completely. The drop wire, the umbilical, and the guide wires were all torn away in an instant. There was no redundancy, no backup. Now freed from its tether, the diving bell plunged uncontrolled into the deep. To the men on deck, it must have felt like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. One moment, the bell was descending normally. The next, it vanished from radar, from tracking, from reach. There was nothing holding it anymore. With the weight of the bell and no cable to restrain it, gravity took over, dragging it down, faster and faster, into the dark pressure of the sea. Inside the bell, Ward and Prangley would have had mere moments to register that something had gone terribly wrong. The controlled descent they were trained for had turned into a freefall. The temperature would have dropped sharply as they plunged past the thermocline, and the comforting hum of surface life support went dead. At approximately 328 feet below the surface, the bell slammed into the seabed. The impact was violent, but did not breach the chamber. The men were alive, but their connection to the surface was gone. They were trapped. No hot water to warm their suits, no breathable gas to replenish the chamber, and no way to communicate. Above, on the Star Canopus, alarms sounded, and the crew scrambled into emergency procedures. Divers on the surface rushed to understand what had happened, but in the cold, technical language of deep-sea diving, the truth was already known. The bell was lost, and with it, the lives of two men hung by the thinnest of threads. The moment the diving bell vanished from control, the Star Canopus transformed from a work vessel into a platform of emergency coordination. Divers, engineers, and supervisors raced the control room. The drop wire was gone. The umbilical was gone. All contact with the bell had been severed. No audio, no telemetry, no signs of life. But there was no time for shock. Every second counted. The cold at that depth was merciless, hovering just above freezing. Without hot water from the surface to warm their suits, Ward and Prangley would be exposed to severe hypothermia. The air inside the bell was limited. The longer the delay, the slimmer the chance of survival. The crew launched emergency protocols for a saturation diving bell recovery, one of the most complex and high-risk procedures in the underwater industry. This wasn't simply about finding a lost object at the bottom of the sea. It was about navigating a hostile environment with limited technology in the middle of the North Sea, under worsening weather conditions. First, they had to locate the bell. Without guide wires or tracking beacons functioning, diverse and remotely operated sonar systems were deployed. The seabed was deep and uneven, and visibility was nearly non-existent. Hours passed in a haze of effort. The rescue team worked against time and nature, current shifting sediment, limited dive durations, equipment failures, all while knowing two men were trapped below, possibly still alive. Finally, after several hours, sonar imaging identified a metallic shape partially embedded in the seabed, just off the platform's position. It was a diving bell, still intact, but locating it was only the beginning. The next task was recovery, to somehow bring the bell back to the surface safely, without causing further damage or risking decompression collapse. Specialized divers suited up, themselves operating in a form of suspended risk. At that depth, a diver can only remain active for a short window before nitrogen buildup becomes fatal. Even approaching the bell meant navigating blind in near-freezing waters, relying on tactile instruments and sheer training. Time dragged. The divers worked through multiple shifts, relaying progress. They confirmed the bell was upright and sealed. That alone gave a glimmer of hope. If the chamber had remained airtight, if the internal systems had lasted, if hypothermia hadn't yet claimed them, then maybe, just maybe, Ward and Prangley were still alive. As the hours passed, 4, then 6, then 10, hope faded into grim endurance. The North Sea showed no mercy. The Star Canopus crew, desperate and exhausted, kept the recovery mission going through the night. 13 hours after the bell had first plunged, it finally broke the surface, hoisted by a secondary cable system designed for deep retrieval. The entire deck held its breath as it was secured and opened, but inside the bell there was only stillness. Both men were dead, Lothar Ward and Gerard Prangley had likely succumbed to a combination of hypothermia and asphyxiation. The exact order of their final moments would remain a mystery. The chamber was intact, but without external life support and heat, their bodies had simply lost the fight against time and temperature. A routine dive had turned into a drawn-out death sentence, not through error in diving, but through mechanical failure above their heads. The divers had done nothing wrong. Their training, preparation, and actions had been flawless. It was the systems around them, the very infrastructure designed to protect them, that had failed. The diving bell was secured on the deck of the Star Canopus, its once polished surface now scarred by the ocean floor and the weight of catastrophe. Inside, Lothar Ward and Gerard Prangley remained where they had spent their final hours, side by side in the small chamber, surrounded by silence. No signs of panic, no desperate damage, just the stillness that comes when the human body finally gives out. The Star Canopus crew stood in reverent silence. For many, this was not just the loss of colleagues. It was a sudden and brutal reminder that even the most routine dives carried a knife's edge of risk. Saturation diving, for all its technology and safety measures, remained one of the most unforgiving professions in the world. And the men who did it knew that. When the vessel returned to shore, an investigation was launched immediately. The diving community needed answers. Families needed closure. Supervisors needed to know how two trained men in a state-of-the-art bell could vanish into the sea and return lifeless. The inquiry revealed a grim but clear sequence of events. First, the anchor chain had not been properly secured. As it dropped, it catastrophically severed the drop wire, umbilical, and guide wires all at once. Furthermore, there were no redundant systems in place that could have caught or slowed the bell's rapid descent. Although the divers remained alive for an unknown period after the plunge, the time was unfortunately long enough that a faster rescue response might have saved them. In short, this tragedy was entirely preventable. The accident exposed major vulnerabilities in diving operations, particularly the reliance on single-point failures. In the wake of the Star Canopus disaster, safety protocols were revisited across the entire industry. New standards were drafted. Anchoring procedures were updated. Redundant life support systems became a priority. Some companies added fail-safe drop mechanisms and emergency locator beacons. But for the families of Ward and Prangley, none of it brought them back. Lothar Ward was a seasoned diver with years of experience under his belt, calm, dependable, and known for his attention to detail. Gerard Prangley was younger, but no less professional, sharp, inquisitive, with a deep respect for the dangers of the job. They were not thrill seekers. They were professionals, and they had done everything right. Their deaths sent a ripple of mourning through the close-knit diving world. Divers across the North Sea, from Norway to Aberdeen, heard the news, and many of them, silently, recalculated their own time spent in depth, because everyone in the field knew the truth. What happened to Lothar and Gerard could have happened to any one of them. The North Sea has always been a place of contradictions, a theater of progress and peril. It offers wealth and energy beneath its surface, but demands a toll in risk, endurance, and sometimes lives. The deaths of Lothar Ward and Gerard Prangley were not the result of reckless decisions or personal error. They weren't men who miscalculated or pushed beyond limits. They were highly trained professionals doing a job, one that demanded trust in the systems, machinery, and procedures surrounding them. And those systems failed. Their story isn't just about the tragedy of two lost lives. It's about the fragile boundary between human capability and technological dependence, how even the smallest oversight, a loose anchor, can ripple outward and bring about irreversible consequences. After the accident, the industry did what it often does. It learned, standards improved, safety mechanisms became stronger, new divers entered the field with better tools and greater protections. In that way, Ward and Prangley's deaths were not in vain. They became a turning point, a line in the sand where complacency ended and accountability began. But even now, decades later, the story of the Star Canopus still resonates, because it reminds us of something fundamental, that when we go to the edge of human limits, whether in the sky, in space, or deep beneath the sea, we do so as fragile beings within a complex machine. And in those places, Respect for risk must never be replaced by routine. The sea does not forgive carelessness. It does not negotiate with delay. It only waits. So we remember them not just as victims, but as warnings, as voices from below reminding those above. Check every line. Test every bolt. Trust the sea, but never underestimate it. Because in the world of deep-sea diving, there is no margin for error. And even the most routine descent can become the last. Not for lack of courage, but for a single broken link in a long, invisible chain.